Hi, y'all. It's Kelly Wolf, and I'm going to talk to y'all about my carbon footprint project. And the topic that I chose was food. So, when we talk about food, we ask the question, where does the carbon come from? So, there's a few ways that we get carbons from food. It can be present, in the food groups. There's four major groups of macromolecules, and I listed them there. It's fats, carbohydrates, proteins, and nucleic acid. All four share the basic property of having a carbon atom skeleton, but differing chemical properties mean that each type of macro molecules has a unique function in diet and health. And actually, carbon is present in all the foods that we eat. But the biggest contributor to carbons is going to be meat, and that's going to be beef, having the highest amount, and the lowest amount is going to be vegetables, legumes, grains, etc. So, how is carbon being released from food? There's a couple of different ways. One of them is the transportation of the food. So, in order to get the food, we have to transport that to the supermarkets, the restaurants, etc. And also the processes that are done at the farming stage that can create carbon. And then food disposal, food waste is another big contributor of carbon. So, how much carbon is released from the food we eat? In the US, the average American has a carbon footprint of 12,000 pounds per year. Worldwide, the average is around 4,000 pounds per year. So, we're pretty high on the scale there in the US. So, how does carbon affect our climate? Climatologically speaking, the more CO2 that is produced, the hotter our environment becomes. And when we start to raise temperatures, even if it's 1 or 2 degrees, that can really affect things such as water temperature. And then when you start altering the water temperature, the pH of the water can become affected, and therefore the marine life can suffer as a result. Also, when you have an increase in temperature, the extreme weather events can occur. So you have more flooding, you may have more hurricanes, you may have tsunamis, and also the carbon can cause a food and water shortage. So, carbon in our ecosystems. So, obviously, we talked about this, the marine life can suffer, but also plant quality becomes impaired, and animals on land can suffer as well. And, carbon is carbon dioxide, for example. Humans, we actually exhale carbon dioxide back into the environment. And it is in our body in minute amounts, but if that becomes compromised, if the homeostasis of carbon dioxide becomes compromised, it can actually kill you. So you have to be really careful with that. And that's how you go into something called acidosis, alkalosis. It's very trying on the kidneys and the lungs. So, which ecosystem is the most affected? It's going to be plant life and trees that are the most affected. And as you can see, my little sad flower there. And so when we talk about these problems with carbon emissions, why should we care? Well, as a society, we should care about these issues because they will one day affect humans if they're not already affecting us in ways we don't even know about. Our food and water supplies will become limited. And if certain species of animals cannot survive the higher levels of CO2, we won't survive as we are dependent on these plants and animals for CO2 and nitrogen utilization. So, how can we reduce carbon footprint from food? Definitely eating less beef and cheese. Those are the two top producers of carbon emission. Don't eat packaged or processed food. Eat a vegetarian diet only, and don't waste food. How to reduce carbon on a national level? We can buy foods in bulk. We can choose organic, reduce food waste, compost waste when possible, and eat low on the food chain. Again, veggies, grains, beans, legumes. How much can we reduce the carbon? Well, just avoiding the meat and the cheese alone, you can reduce your carbon footprint individually by almost 3,000 pounds per year. I found that pretty astounding. Not to mention the other ways that you can reduce your carbon footprint. So that's definitely a start just by reducing that consumption. So my initial carbon footprint was 67 tons of CO2 per year, which I thought was pretty large number. The largest amount of carbon is in the form of commuting to work for me. So my reduction plan would be try carpooling to work, purchase more fuel efficient vehicles when available, conserve energy by turning off lights when not needed, reduce food waste, and eat a low carbon diet. Well, the results? I actually did start carpooling a few days a week with a nearby coworker, and we had actually carpooled at one point, and I brought up the idea, and she was all for it. So it not only helps the environment, but it also saves fuel money. So I've also become much more cognizant of the amount of food I was wasting before, and I'm trying to repurpose leftovers now currently. I try to leave all lights off while at home during the day and before I leave for work. And then to decrease fuel emissions, I travel only when necessary now. And this is my works cited. Thank you so much for your attention.